This week I'm thinking about the Christofascism of our time and the phrase, the faith that can move mountains. A lot of this comes from a sermon that my pastors gave on Sunday. I'm not going to link to that because I don't want to make them publicly accountable for what I'm drawing from it, but the research comes from them. Growing up, I was usually taught scripture as individualized. So when we read about Jesus entering the temple and upending the tables of the moneylenders and cursing the fig tree that won't bear fruit and calling out the religious leaders for their hypocrisy, all of this in Matthew 21 through 23, the message was, don't cheat people, bear fruit, don't be a hypocrite. And all of that is not wrong, but let's see what Jesus is doing in a broader way in these chapters. And then we're going to come back at the end to faith that moves mountains. He has just triumphantly entered Jerusalem, crowds cheering and praising. And the first thing Jesus does is go into the temple and flip tables. The moneylenders that he flips out on weren't cheating the locals, they were cheating the foreigners, those who had to exchange their currency. They were cheating the poor who didn't have their own sacrifice to bring. And Jesus physically disrupts their space. He uses phrasing that references Jeremiah 7, which the whole crowd would have known by heart, where the Lord rails against those who oppress the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, those who shed innocent blood and make up their own gods to follow. Okay, sound familiar? Flash forward 2 chapters where Jesus is calling out the religious leaders for their hypocrisy at length. It's an incredible rant. He goes on and on and on, punctuating his judgment with metaphors like brood of vipers and whitewashed tomb. He talks about how the leaders shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces, how the religious authorities put on a good show, but have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness, how they're full of greed and self-indulgence. He even talks about how these leaders claim that they would have done the right thing in past conflicts. Seriously. But says they might as well just go ahead and do what they're going to do in plain sight. He absolutely excoriates those in power for doing the very things that the evangelical church and Christofascists are doing today. Go read it if you haven't. It's incredible. By the way, Jesus ends that rant by comparing himself to a hen that is a mom gathering her chicks. I like that part. And between these things and some parables and stuff, Jesus curses the fig tree. The version in Mark lets us know that figs were out of season, but what we know here is that this fig tree had leaves. And apparently there are fig trees, I just recently learned this, that only grow leaves when they bear fruit. In other words, this tree was faking it. It was the same thread that ran through the table flipping in the temples and the rant against hypocritical leaders. You who are in power exploit and pretend, and you don't bear fruit, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. So Jesus says to the fig tree, you never will. And it shrivels up. The disciples in Matthew 21 didn't ask Jesus why he did it, but they did ask how. Here's where we get to moving mountains. It's not just about one tree, Jesus responds. You see this mountain? That monolith that has always been there, that feels like it's going to be there forever. I don't think Jesus was talking about a personal problem. He was talking about something that had shaped the very landscape of their lives. An immovable seat of authority. A fixture that oppresses the foreigner and the fatherless and the widow, that polishes its exterior while the inside is rotten to the core. And Jesus says, you can say to this mountain, go fuck yourself, and it will. I'm paraphrasing. And I'm thinking of the protests and the signs and the courage it's going to take to throw the mountains we've inherited and those we've made into the sea. There was a time before they were mountains, and there will be a time after. And God says we get to tell them where to hurl themselves.